My friends, everything started to shift once the board began to fall in a completely unexpected way. And sitting there at pick number 23, you could feel that something unusual was about to happen with the Philadelphia Eagles. The way this mock draft unfolded wasn't normal. There were trades happening all over the league, teams getting aggressive, players flying off the board earlier than expected, and because of that chaos, a scenario opened up that you simply can't ignore if you're thinking like a general manager trying to sustain long-term success. As the names kept coming off the board, one after another, it became clear that a certain type of opportunity was forming. And when that happens, you don't overthink it, you don't hesitate, you take advantage. That's exactly why the decision at pick 23 ended up being Max Hodger out of Arizona State, a player who might not be the most polished in this class right now, but has one of the highest ceilings among offensive tackles available. This is where it gets interesting for Eagles fans, because this isn't just about filling a need today, this is about thinking ahead. Hodger is nearly 6'6", over 320 pounds, incredibly athletic for his size, and his testing numbers backed that up in a big way. He didn't even allow a sack in his most recent season, which immediately stands out, but at the same time, he's still raw. His footwork needs refinement, his technique isn't fully developed, and he's relatively new to football, only starting in 2021 after being born in Nigeria. Now, normally, that kind of profile would scare teams off early in the first round, but not here. Not for a team like the Eagles. Because if there's one thing this organization has consistently shown, it's patience when developing offensive linemen. And when you connect that to the reality of Lane Johnson not playing forever, the vision becomes clear. This isn't about replacing a legend overnight. This is about preparing for the moment when that transition becomes unavoidable. Instead of waiting until it's too late and scrambling for a replacement, this approach allows a Hodger to sit, learn, develop, and grow into that role over time. It's the same philosophy that has worked before, and the belief here is simple. If you trust the coaching staff and the system, you can turn elite traits into elite production. But the strategy didn't stop there. Moving into the second round at pick 54, the board didn't fall as cleanly, and that forced a different kind of decision. Instead of chasing positional value blindly, the move was to bring in Keontae Scott, a safety out of Miami who brings a completely different dimension to the defense. He's not the biggest player on the field, but what he lacks in size, he makes up for with speed, explosiveness, and pure playmaking ability. We're talking about a player who had 64 tackles, multiple pass breakups, interceptions, forced fumbles, and even touchdowns. He's the type of defender who doesn't just react, he disrupts. And in today's NFL, having that kind of versatility in the secondary matters more than ever. Pairing him with a player like Andrew Makuba gives the Eagles a young, affordable, and dynamic safety duo that can grow together while making impact plays right away. And then everything took a turn that not every fan is going to agree with. Because behind the scenes, there's a growing belief that A.J. Brown might not be fully committed to staying in Philadelphia long term. Nothing public, nothing official, but enough noise to at least consider the possibility. And when you're building a roster, you can't ignore situations that could turn into distractions, especially for a team with Super Bowl expectations. So the move was made, a bold one. A.J. Brown is traded, and in return comes Davante Adams, a veteran receiver who just led the league in touchdowns and is still producing at an elite level. On top of that, the Eagles gain financial flexibility, clearing massive future cash commitments while bringing in a player on an expiring deal, which opens even more options moving forward. Now, let's be real, this is the kind of move that splits a fan base instantly. You're talking about moving on from a dominant receiver who has been a cornerstone of the offense. But at the same time, you're avoiding long-term financial strain, removing potential locker room tension, and still keeping the offense competitive with a proven veteran who can deliver right now. And that's really the theme of everything happening here. It's not just about talent, it's about timing, flexibility, and long-term sustainability.
The Eagles aren't rebuilding. They're recalibrating while staying in contention. Every move, every pick, every trade is connected to that idea. Staying competitive today while protecting the future. But here's the question that really matters, and it's the one that could define how you feel about everything that's been done so far. If you knew there was even a small chance of locker room issues and long-term financial strain, would you still hold on to A.J. Brown, or would you make that move for flexibility and short-term stability with Davante Adams? And once that move is made, everything else starts to fall into place in a way that shows this wasn't just a random gamble. It was a calculated chain reaction designed to reshape multiple areas of the roster at the same time. because right after bringing in Davante Adams and picking up that additional second-round value, the Eagles immediately go back to work addressing one of the most important needs on this defense, the pass rush. With the 61st overall pick, the selection is denied Dennis Sutton out of Penn State, and this is where you start to see the identity of this draft class really come together. Dennis Sutton isn't just another rotational edge rusher. He's a player with size, power, and the kind of physical profile that fits exactly what Philadelphia has always valued along the defensive line. At nearly 6 feet 6 inches and around 256 pounds, he already has the frame to compete at the NFL level, and the production backs it up with 8.5 sacks and 50 pressures in his most recent season. That's not a fluke, that's consistent disruption. What stands out even more is how he wins. He's not just relying on speed off the edge, he converts that speed into power, he can collapse the pocket, and he flashes the ability to drop into coverage when needed. Yes, his pass rush arsenal still needs refinement, and there are moments where he lacks counters, but that's exactly the kind of player this coaching staff has developed successfully before. You're not drafting a finished product, you're drafting a high upside contributor who can make an impact early while still growing into something more. Then the focus shifts again, this time to the offensive side, and specifically to the tight end position, which quietly becomes one of the most important long-term questions on the roster. With pick 68, the Eagles select Sam Roush out of Stanford, and this is a move that tells you a lot about what the team is planning for the future. Roush is a big-bodied tight end, standing at 6 feet 6 inches and close to 270 pounds, and he moves far better than someone at that size should. He ran a 4.74 40-yard dash, which immediately puts him in a different category athletically. But this isn't just about numbers. What really matters is how he plays. He's physical, he's willing as a blocker, and he's comfortable working inline, which is something the Eagles have always valued when they want to lean into a more physical, bully ball style offense. And when you consider the situation with Dallas Goedert being on an expiring deal, this pick makes even more sense. Instead of waiting and reacting, the Eagles are once again planning ahead, bringing in a player who can develop into that role while still contributing in the rotation early on. But the front office didn't stop there, because another major decision was made that continues to emphasize long-term roster management over short-term comfort. Moro Ojomo, a former 7th-round pick who developed into a highly productive interior pass rusher, is traded to the Chicago Bears in exchange for a 3rd-round pick. And at first glance, that might not sit well with everyone. Trading away a productive young defensive tackle isn't something you do lightly, but when you look deeper, the reasoning becomes clear. Ojomo is going to command a significant contract soon, especially after outperforming expectations and showing he can consistently generate pressure. At the same time, the Eagles already have major financial commitments coming up, particularly with Jalen Carter. Keeping both simply isn't realistic, so instead of losing Ojomo for nothing later, they turn him into value now. And that value turns into Chris McClellan out of Missouri, a defensive tackle who brings something this defense actually needs more of, run-stopping ability. At nearly 6 feet 4 inches and over 310 pounds, McClellan has the size and strength to handle double teams, plug gaps, and provide stability against the run. His production took a noticeable jump recently, with tackles for loss, sacks, and pressures all increasing, showing that there's more to his game than just occupying space. He can rotate in early, contribute immediately, and fill a role that wasn't being consistently addressed. And then comes one of the most intriguing picks of the entire draft. Brennan Thompson, wide receiver out of Mississippi State. This is the kind of player that changes games in a single play. He's undersized at 5 feet 9 inches, around 164 pounds, but what he brings is pure speed. Elite, game-breaking speed. He ran in the low 4.2s, one of the fastest times at the combine, and that shows up on tape every time he touches the ball. Over 1,000 yards, nearly 20 yards per catch, and constant pressure on defenses vertically. Even with inconsistent quarterback play, he found ways to produce, to separate, and to create explosive moments. And when you look at the current roster, this pick isn't just about adding depth, it's about adding a future weapon. With Marquise Hollywood Brown only on a 1-year deal, the Eagles are setting up a transition. Thompson can come in, learn, get snaps, and potentially take over that deep threat role sooner than expected if he proves he's ready. So when you step back and look at everything together, this isn't just a collection of picks. It's a full strategy. Offensive line succession planning, secondary playmaking, pass rush reinforcement, tight end future-proofing, defensive line balance, and adding explosive speed on offense. 6 picks, multiple trades, big risks, big vision. And that's why this entire mock draft feels so polarizing. Because if it works, it sets the Eagles up not just for for 2026, but for years beyond. But if it doesn't, especially that A.J. Brown move, it's the kind of decision people will point back to as the turning point. So now it comes down to you. And when you really sit with that question, it forces you to think beyond just names on a roster and look at how championship windows are actually sustained in the NFL. Because what was done here wasn't random, it was aggressive, calculated, and built on one core belief: staying ahead is better than reacting too late. Think about the bigger picture. The Eagles didn't just draft players, they created layers of insurance across the roster. Max Hager isn't just a pick, he's a succession plan. Keontae Scott isn't just depth, he's a playmaker added to a young core. Dennis Sutton isn't just a rotational piece, he's a future starter being developed early. Sam Roush isn't just another tight end, he's a potential replacement before a gap even appears. And then you circle back to the moves that really define everything: the trades. Moving on from A.J. Brown is the type of decision that can reshape a locker room, a fan base, and even the identity of the offense. But at the same time, bringing in Davante Adams keeps the team competitive right now, while freeing up massive financial flexibility moving forward. That flexibility is what allows teams to stay contenders instead of collapsing under the weight of contracts. The trade of Moro Ojomo follows that same philosophy. Turning a late-round success story into a third-round pick before having to pay him is exactly the kind of move that smart front offices make, even if it's unpopular in the moment. And replacing him with a player who better fits a current weakness, like run defense, shows that this wasn't just about saving money, it was about reallocating resources more efficiently. Then there's Brennan Thompson, and this is where things get even more interesting offensively, because adding that kind of speed changes how defenses line up. It stretches the field, opens space underneath, and creates opportunities for everyone else. If he develops faster than expected, this offense suddenly has a completely different dimension that wasn't there before. So now you're looking at a team that still has star power, still has depth, but is also quietly resetting key positions before they become problems. That's how you avoid the drop-off that so many contenders face. That's how you stay in the mix year after year. But let's not pretend this comes without risk. Because if Davante Adams declines, if Hager takes longer than expected to develop, if the young defensive pieces don't hit, or if A.J. Brown goes somewhere else and dominates, then this entire strategy starts to look very different. That's the reality of bold decisions. They raise both the ceiling and the pressure. And that's exactly why this kind of approach divides people. Some will see vision. Others will see unnecessary risk. Now it's your turn to step into that front office mindset. Would you rather play it safe, keep your proven